Good evening, everybody. Thank you for braving the weather tonight, coming out on this rainy evening. It's good to see everybody here. So we are continuing our summer series tonight. I am delighted to introduce our speaker. I've mentioned several times, our speaker is David West. He comes from down the road at Pace Church of Christ. He began working there in June 2016 as their pulpit minister. He has worked full-time or part-time in ministry since 1981, serving congregations in Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida. In Tennessee, he was a deacon, and right now he also, besides the pulpit minister, currently serves as an elder at the church that meets in Pace. He has also taught Bible classes and private schools in Georgia and Tennessee, and a man from O&R, he's also taught 5th and 6th graders in public elementary schools in Tennessee. His wife is Kathy, and they have been married since 1981. He has 3 children, Ryan, Emily, and Haley. Did I get that right? Hallie, sorry about that. No problem. Ryan and his wife, Tabby, have 3 children, Gemma, Josie, and Julep. He has bachelor's degrees from Freed-Hardeman University in Bible and Middle Tennessee State University in elementary education, as well as a master's degree in school administration from Middle Tennessee State. And he's done graduate work in Bible at Harding, Lipscomb, and Freed-Hardeman. We're very excited for your lesson tonight, so I won't take up any more of your time. David West.
Well, good evening to everybody. Other than Pace, one of my favorite places to come speak at. And I genuinely mean that. You guys have always treated me well when I've come here and know a lot of folks here and just enjoy the folks that make up the Margaret Street congregation. A couple things as we get started. One, I did debate about changing the topic from David and Goliath to Noah and the flood. My pool has not lacked for water. Matter of fact, I keep wondering when it's going to start going over. So those of you that have been praying for rain, stop. Just stop. All right? But yeah, it is good to be with you tonight. And I am very thankful for the series that you're doing. One of the things that takes place sometimes in lessons and in preaching and that kind of thing is we sometimes get very technical. We sometimes do these very deep dives into Scripture, and that needs to be done. Don't get me wrong, that needs to be done. And we can get so busy looking at the trees, as the old saying goes, that we forget the beauty of the forest. And what you're doing by going back and looking at some of these childhood stories that are far more than stories. These are not myths. These are not legends. This is not folklore. These are actual events that took place. And they are stories that God included in His Word because there's something there for us. And in this lesson, what's here for us is more than just being the underdog. And a lot of times when a lesson on David and Goliath is done, that's the approach that's taken. You know, you're the underdog, you can overcome. Granted, there's truth to that. So let me share a little story with you. In 1981, when I graduated from Freed-Hardeman College, I took a job in Albany, Georgia. And you're about an hour from the Florida line at that point. You're down there close to Valdosta. And so I'm down there working and enjoying the work there, those kinds of things. But one of the things I found out was that in that town, there was the Sherwood Baptist Church. Now, I know it's a little odd to mention the Baptist Church in a Church of Christ building. Okay, I get that. How many of you have ever seen Fireproof or Courageous or Facing the Giants? Yeah, show of hands on that. The guy that directed those, produced those, and actually started a lot of those was a member at that Baptist church. And so when you see, like if you've seen the movie they did, Courageous, I know where all those streets are. I drove those streets when I lived in Albany. But Facing the Giants, if you've ever seen the movie, is about a coach and a football team who are taking on the big teams. And they're winning. And it made for a very good movie. It's about overcoming those obstacles that are in front of us. But you know what? This is not Albany, Georgia. And this is not a movie set. This is real life. Tomorrow morning, Lord willing, and you get up and you start your day's adventure, you have no idea yet what you're going to face. There may be things you think are going to happen, and it may not turn out that way. Tomorrow may be the absolute best day of your life. And tomorrow could easily be the absolute worst. You just don't know. On any given Sunday evening, if I'm looking at the calendar on my phone, I've got some things I know I'm going to do every day. By Monday morning, the things that are on my calendar have all shifted. And all it takes is one phone call. One phone call. Can you meet us at the hospital? All it takes is one member getting a diagnosis of cancer. Or you get that call, they died. And you're called on to go into that family and try to provide comfort. All of those things are challenges, difficulties, obstacles. They are the giants that we face. And those giants oftentimes test our faith. Because when we're going through those struggles, when we look like we are outnumbered, when we look like we are outmatched, we're wondering like, is my God big enough to handle this? And come on, let's be honest. There have been valleys that you have walked through where you've had those moments of doubt. You've had those moments where you've wondered, am I going to come out the other side of this, and am I going to come out of it in one piece? Or is this it? Is my world collapsing around me? The story of David and Goliath is one about a young man and what we often refer to as a giant. Let's begin by talking a little bit about the story. In the first part of the chapter, and I'm going to share with you verse 3, you have the Philistines that stood on one side of the mountain, on a mountain on one side, and the Israelites were on a mountain on the other side, and in between them was a valley. A valley. Day after day after day, there was this stalemate going on. And day after day after day, nothing changed. Had a phone call this afternoon before I left the office from one of our members that for 3 years has been dealing with the same ongoing medical issue. 3 years. The severe part of it, he said to me, my doctor said, I am in month 93. And I said, I couldn't help but laugh. It's like, there's only 52 weeks in a year. And the worst part of his journey, he's in the 93rd month of that. And that's his giant. And for him, what's on one side is life and what's on the other side is death. Is this going to take me out? Your giants may not be life and death situations, but they certainly are faith situations where you've got decisions, hard decisions. And on one side you'll have a decision that may be the right one to go with, but the pull, the draw from the other side is so intense. It's so intense. And you're trying to figure out what to do, and you are in that valley of decision. So day after day after day, this is going on. And Goliath, who's one of our main characters, kind of the big guy on the Philistine army, was coming out every day, their champion. And he was challenging them. He was challenging them, and we'll talk more about that challenge in a moment, to just send out somebody to take him on. One person. I'll represent the Philistines. You send out your warrior, your champion, and instead of our armies going to battle, it'll be man on man. And if I win, you are our slaves, and if you win, we are your slaves. And day after day after day, Israel cowered in fear. One of the greatest obstacles you have to overcome in your life is fear. We tend to be more afraid about what might happen instead of what is actually happening. Goliath. Goliath was a big old boy. If you kind of translate things out of shekels and all that kind of stuff, cubits, 9 feet, 9 inches tall. Now you're going like, nobody was ever that big. I did a list search today of all the people, or not all, but any famous people that were over 7 feet tall. 7 feet. That's tall. Think Shaquille O'Neal. Okay? Tall. But that wasn't the tallest. So I did a search of people that were over 8 feet tall. And there's a guy living today, a farmer in Holland, who is 8 feet 3 inches tall. And he is, as we would say back home, he is a hoss of a man. He's not some slim-looking guy. He's got muscles. Giant of a guy. I used to be 6 foot. I'm getting older, so I'm now 5'11". Don't worry, it'll happen to you too. My son played basketball in high school, where their guy under the post was 6'7". We got a couple guys that go to pace that I joke with them that we're going to have to cut a hole in the doorway between the lobby and the auditorium, because they have to duck when they go through. So really tall people, but I've never met anybody that was over 9 feet tall. Do I believe Goliath was that big? I sure do. Sure do. You'll read about his armor. And there's various estimates of that. His armor supposedly weighed 125 pounds. That's just the armor. The helmet and the coat of mail that he wore, those kinds of things. His spear, the head of his spear, weighed 15 pounds. That's huge. I mean, that is absolutely huge. Now, to put some things in perspective, as I did some checking, it's not uncommon for a military person who's in the field to carry 125 to 150 pounds. So to have armor that's that heavy, that's not an unrealistic thing. Matter of fact, there have been people who have studied what life was back during this time, roughly 3,000 years ago or so. And they're looking at the kind of armor people would have had, so forth. It wouldn't have been as big as Goliath's, but typical kind of armor. And there's this kid named David. Now, I want to clear up something for you. I said a kid. And to me, because I'm 60, be 64 in a few months, to me, a kid is anybody younger than me. We often think of David as being this preteen boy. Single digit in age, maybe. You know, it never says that in the text. Now, exactly how old was David when he encountered Goliath? There's some debate about that. The earliest that people think he might be is 13. Probably based on the reading I've done and the research I've done, probably closer to 15 to 19. And the reason why I say 19 might be the top number, David wasn't in the military. And if you go back and study your Old Testament, your military troops were normally 20 and above. So he was probably in his mid to latter teens. Goliath, 9'9". The average height in the ancient world, in this time frame of David and Goliath, for a man, for a full-grown man, was 5 feet to 5'3". And if you were really, really tall, you might be 5'6" to about 5'9". That was big. And if David, let's say he was in his latter teens and he was pretty much at his height. Let's say he was tall for his age. He was 5'9". Goliath, 9'9". Goliath had been fighting battles for years. He had been trained to be their champion. David was a shepherd boy. A shepherd boy. 7th son of his father. Always had to deal with the older brothers. And in the story we have in 1 Samuel 17, David has to deal with the older brothers who want to know, why in the world are you out here? Are you just out here to see the show? So even his own brothers were not giving him respect. So David is there and he's witnessing Goliath make these challenges to God's people. Pause for a moment. Who are you? You are God's people. There is no challenge, there is no adversity, there is no difficulty that you are going to face that you are going to face alone. And one of the things that we're going to find true in this story is, I can't depend on me, and you can't depend on you, and David could not depend on himself to be victorious in this situation. There are things in life that happens that is bigger than we'll ever be. And it's a wonderful thing. It's an amazing thing that whatever happens in my life, I don't have to face alone. I don't have to deal with that. Probably the most giant situation I have ever faced in my life was burying a daughter. And I've shared that story with some of y'all before. About 2 1/4 when she was killed in a car wreck. Man, I prayed for 6 months. Literally, I prayed for 6 months God would let me die. I had broken ribs, broken collarbone, broken shoulder blade. They finally brought me some Jell-O in the hospital because, there's always room for Jell-O. Took one bite and I had teeth that started moving. But a parent should never have to bury their child. That little girl would be turning 40 this year. It's probably been the biggest giant in my life. And did God and I have many a one-sided conversation where I'm talking to God? Oh yeah. And kind of like the story of Job, God never answered back. Was I angry with God? Yes, I was. Did I understand what was going on? No, I did not. And you're going to face some obstacles where you're going to sit there and it's like, okay, God, I don't get this. I don't understand this. There is this giant that I'm confronting, and he's so big. Go to the book of Job and read chapter 3. One of the most sorrowful chapters in the entire Bible, where Job is talking to God, saying, if you knew my life was going to be this miserable, why did you not let me die before I was ever born? Job is pouring out his heart. And at the end of the book, Job still doesn't have an answer as to why. You're going to face your giants. Now, how do you deal with them? Part of it is by realizing what the challenge is. The challenge is not just about the immediate situation. The challenge can be about your faith. If you look at 1 Samuel 17, verse 10, part of what Goliath was repeatedly saying day after day after day, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. He was slamming God's people, and implied in that, he was disrespecting, dishonoring the God of Israel. For 40 days this goes on, and God's people are just kind of like, you going to take him on? You going to take him on? Well, I'm not going either. Again, that fear factor. David's been watching the sheep, and he goes, because his dad said to, take some food and supplies to your brothers and the other folks that are at the front line. He does that. He leaves it with the people in charge, and he's looking for his brothers, that kind of thing. And he is there and witnesses this giant of a man come out and belittle God's people. And he's confused. He doesn't understand why God's people aren't willing to take on the giant. And they're not. They're just standing there in their fear. Not wanting to die, not wanting to go into the valley. David's brothers putting him down. Word gets around the camp, there's this young man who's asking all this stuff, questioning why isn't anybody fighting him. It gets to King Saul's ear. And you got this whole thing of nobody's willing to step up and face the giant except this one young man. One young man. I mentioned I got my 64th birthday coming up at the end of this year, in October. And I guess since I hit 60, I'm contemplating, because based on statistics, I am in the last fourth of my life. That's an encouraging thought, isn't it? I am in the last quarter of my life. And I'm looking at what I've done, what I've failed to do, where I've succeeded, and where I have fallen flat on my face. Things I've done right, things I've done wrong. And I am all of that, just like you are all that for yourself. Am I willing to take on the challenges? Am I willing to be different? But I also realize that as I am in that last quarter of my life, I've gotten a little bit set in my ways. Don't mean to. My kids still tell me that I'm fairly open-minded and I'm willing to take some chances and so forth, but I am a pretty straight kind of guy. Kind of been that way my whole life. Not a bad thing, it's just kind of the way my personality was. Haven't been a big risk taker. You do realize I'm blending in my story and your story and David's story and so forth, all that. I may have shared this with some of y'all before. I grew up between Hadley, Amory, and Smithville, Mississippi. And if you don't know where those places are, there's probably a reason you don't, because they don't show up real well on a map. And I was that shy, nerdy kid. I know that comes as a shock to some of you, right? Yeah. I was that shy, nerdy kid who had zero athletic ability, who grew up on a hog farm, and we had over like 500 head of hogs at one point. My youngest daughter asked me, "What sports did you play in high school?" I said, "I didn't. I had chores. I came home from school and dealt with the hogs. And when I finished with them, it was feed the cows." Very embarrassed about my family. Anybody here relate to that? Do y'all know the definition of the word redneck? My family's picture is next to that in the encyclopedia. And I'm in that picture. Extremely shy. How shy were you, David? I was so shy that when a car came up the country road I lived on, I would run hide behind the house. And when you're 16, that's really a problem. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm not. What have I been doing, full-time, part-time, whatever, since 1981? What I'm doing right now. Standing in front of people, trying to carry on rational thought in a verbal form. To this day, when I preach on Sunday, I typically don't eat breakfast, and you can look at me and know I love to eat. Because one of my prayers when I get up to this day on Sunday morning is, "Lord, don't let me throw up in front of them." And the day that I quit being nervous when I get up to preach is the day I need to quit. I still get nervous. You want to see me really nervous? Ask me to lead singing. I'll do it. Done it. Been the regular song leader in a congregation before. Panic attack just about every time I get up. I don't know if I'll ever overcome that. That was another one of my giants. And I guess the point of that is, if I can do this, there's not much you can't do either. Because you see, when those challenges, difficulties come, even the challenges to your faith, whether that be situations, whether that be adversities, or whether that be people who are putting you down because you believe in a condemned political prisoner who was publicly executed because they thought he was a fraud. That political prisoner that was executed, you know his name, Jesus. And people will think you are nuts for believing in a dead man come back to life. We're living in a time right now when Christianity is no longer the majority religion. Fastest growing religion in the United States right now are the nuns. Not the Catholic ladies with the habits. No, that's not that nuns. The folks that don't have any religious affiliation. None. They're not Jewish. They're not Muslim. They're not Buddhist. They're not Christian. They're nothing. And many of them think you are an idiot, an absolute idiot, for coming out on a rainy Wednesday night to listen to a guy talk about David and Goliath. And some of these younger folks are facing those challenges in a much more intense way than those of us that are older ever faced them. And that's another reason why they need to hear these stories. Your faith is going to be challenged. So what weapons do you use? King Saul, was head and shoulders above his peers. He was a tall guy. Not as tall as Goliath, but he was a tall guy. And when David finally got accepted, like, okay, you can go fight Goliath, they tried putting Saul's armor on him. That would be like taking one of my suits at home and putting on my granddaughter Julep, who's about 10 months old right now. It would swallow her whole. That armor wasn't going to work. Goliath's got his shield, and he's got his spear, and he's got all this other stuff, his sword. David is a shepherd boy who's used a sling to kill a bear and to kill a lion. And so David takes all that armor off, doesn't pick up a sword, doesn't pick up a spear, but as you see in verse 47, he acknowledged he's not going to win the battle by his superior military ability. David's not going to win the battle because he's got more advanced weaponry. It's not going to be your skill. It's not going to be your abilities. It's not going to be your talent. It's not going to be your finesse in how you do things. The battle is the Lord's. That's what it is. It's the Lord's. And he says to the giant in front of him, God will give you into our hands. So what did this shepherd boy take as his weapon of choice? A sling and some stones. That was it. That was all he had. No, automatic rifle, no tank, no, bombs or anything like that. Just a sling and some rocks. That was it. Because when you got God on your side, that's all you need. Weapons you have in your arsenal right now. I saw something tonight when I came in. Picked one up. I spent most of my day updating our prayer list that we have at Pace. You have prayer requests right there. And I suspect you get a sheet of paper like this every Wednesday. And I suspect on Sunday you have a bulletin or something that may list sick folks and all that. We live in the age of medicine. We live in the age of doctors and nurses and technicians and tests and all that kind of stuff. But who is the great physician? Oh, that's not to say that God's going to heal anybody and everybody. It's going to be His will that's done. Those people on that list, do you pray for them? Do you pray for yourself? Do you go to God saying, I am your child, and I am putting my life in your hands? Do you pray for this congregation, that it will grow and it will thrive for the glory of God? Prayer is a powerful weapon that can knock down any giant in front of you. It's turning it over to the Lord, isn't it? The battle is the Lord's. And I don't have the sword, I don't have the spear, I have this sling, I have this rock, and with this, God is going to take you out. Let's move on here. Read through this whole chapter. You get down to the end of the chapter. Verse 50, so David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone and struck the Philistine and killed him. And then you know what the rest of the Philistines did at that point? That massive army that had been standing there for weeks in opposition to God's people, they ran. They ran. All it took was bringing down their one big guy. And everything else fell. Well, what if I do this, then what about this? And, well, this might happen, and this might happen. And no, sometimes all it takes is the one thing to fall. And you see God opening not just a door, but a multitude of doors. And He can do that. How do I know that? Because He's God. He's God. And if it's God and you on the same side, you just became the majority. If it's God and you on the same side, there is no giant you can't overcome. If it's God and you on the same side, it does not matter what life brings you your way. You are not alone. You are not alone because God's with you. Beautiful story about David and Goliath. And I love what's said in the book of Hebrews chapter 11 where it mentions David and a lot of other people. For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets. And then it talks about all the things they faced, all the things they endured. And how did they deal with that? By faith. My God is big. And my God is awesome. And my God had the will to fight for me to overcome the biggest giants in my life. Not just the loss of a daughter. Not just fear of public speaking or fear of public. See, I'm like you. I have a sin problem. I'm addicted. You are too. And you may have tried your own rehab program. Probably hasn't worked well for you. We are sin defiled. Every one of us. And there is no way that we can overcome sin on our own. No way. You can't be good enough. You can't be good enough long enough. I think I've said this before on one of my other times here. I can be really good for about 2 weeks. 3 is a stretch. Can you relate to that? Bet you never thought you'd hear a preacher say he could only be good for about 2 weeks. Well, the same's true for you, right? You can, on your own resolve, go for a few days, maybe a couple of weeks, plowing through, and then a dose of reality hits you between the eyes, and man, you fall apart again. My God is big. Bigger than any Goliath in my life. Because see, Jesus, God's gift to me and God's gift to you, overcame death, overcame the grave, overcame hell, overcame sin. He was that sacrifice that fixed me when I had absolutely no ability in myself to fix me. Only weapon I really need is God. God so loved me and so loved you that He has promised if we will walk by faith, we will have the victory. The invitation song that was chosen, I believe, was 740. Am I correct on that? And I believe the title is that, What Will You Do with Jesus? Valley of Decision. Are you standing with the people of God because God's on your side? Or are you looking at those big old boys on the other hill, thinking there's no way? You got sin in your life? You got personal addiction in your life? You got doubts in your life, you got challenges in your life, you've got whatever in your life, and you are struggling, and you are miserable, and you feel alone, and you are down, and you don't know what to do. Take a stand with God. Decide what you are going to do with the resource that God has given you. And that resource is Jesus Christ. And that means if you are not a Christian, scary thought, you are fighting the battle by yourself and you're going to lose. So at this invitation, it's not a casual stroll to the front that you might get to the baptistry. Run. Run. Crawl if you have to. But for a lot of us that are Christians, we look at our skill set, our abilities, our talents, etc., and we've got it under control. If you find somebody that tells you they've got it under control, consider them a dangerous person. Because none of us really have it under control. God does. And sometimes those of us who are part of God's army forget that. David's decision to trust God, to trust in the promises of God, to trust in the name of God, is what finally rallied all of God's army. What will you do with God's gift to you? What will you allow God to fight for in your life? What will you do with Jesus? You decide that while we stand.